In 1492, Spain stumbled into the largest transfer of bullion in human history. Mountains of silver and rivers of gold were mined from the Americas and hardened into rigid control under the Spanish crown. To understand the scale of this wealth, consider that an estimated 16,000 tons of silver poured into the empire from just one mountain range over a single century. By all mathematical logic, this influx of precious metal should have guaranteed endless financial supremacy. Instead, Habsburg Spain became the first nation in history to serially default on its sovereign debt. The crown declared bankruptcy in 1557, then again in 1575, 1596, and 1607. How did the discovery of the world's greatest physical treasure engineer a catastrophic financial ruin? By the late 1400s, European powers were racing to claim newly mapped continents. This map illustrates the Treaty of Tordesillas from 1494. Spain and Portugal arbitrarily drew a line down the Atlantic Ocean, declaring that everything to the west belonged to the Spanish crown, while the east fell to Portugal. This paper agreement gave legal cover for conquerors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro to march into highly developed cities like Tenochtitlan and dismantle them by force. The treaty entirely ignored indigenous sovereignty. It replaced existing political structures with a system optimized for absolute territorial control and maximum resource extraction. This embedded a flaw into the empire's DNA. The Spanish crown began to operate on a very specific theory of power, that a nation's wealth comes from conquering and taking, rather than building and engineering. High in modern-day Bolivia, Spanish forces located the silver-rich mountain of Cerro Rico. Over the next century, this single peak acted as the geological engine funding the empire. The output from Potosí transformed a European kingdom into a global economic juggernaut, projecting military power from the Philippines to the Netherlands. But ultimately, resource abundance is a trap. Spain mistook the sudden, massive inflow of raw metal for sustainable geopolitical strength. By the late 1500s, under the reign of Philip II, Spain controlled a territory so vast that the sun never set on its borders. The crown projected this dominance culturally, financing monumental architectural projects like the gigantic palace monastery of El Escorial. Modern records show that Spain operated with reasonable fiscal discipline in these early years. Philip II managed his staggering expenses by negotiating advanced local sales taxes, known as alcabalas, keeping primary budgets in surplus. However, maintaining armies across multiple continents required a relentless, escalating flow of cash. The margin for error was exactly zero. This chart shows the money supply expanding faster than domestic production could keep pace. As silver flooded in, prices across Spain and much of Europe roughly quadrupled between 1500 and 1650. What felt like national enrichment was actually early modern inflation, a phenomenon historians called the price revolution. Spain used its newfound liquidity to purchase finished goods from rival nations, rather than investing in its own domestic manufacturing. Silver went out, and finished goods came in. In contrast, nations like England lacked deep silver reserves. To compete, they were forced to engineer efficient domestic industries and reliable credit networks. Unmanaged resource abundance breeds complacency. It rots a nation's financial plumbing long before the cracks show on the outside. By the late 1580s, the defeat of the Invincible Armada and military campaigns in the Netherlands pushed the crown's spending far beyond its tax revenues. This chart tracks crown revenues. The black area shows volatile silver remittances funding expensive wars. When storms delayed fleets, cash flow evaporated. Unable to raise emergency funds, Philip II suspended payments, triggering sovereign bankruptcies in 1575 and 1596. When a state borrows against the hope of future treasure shipments rather than building institutional credibility, a single military setback is enough to trigger a total financial collapse. In the late 18th century, the Spanish Bourbon dynasty attempted to reverse the empire's decline through a massive administrative overhaul. They introduced the intendancy system, replacing local officials with appointed governors reporting directly to the monarchy. In the short term, it worked. The empire gained detailed cartographic maps, improved law enforcement, and generated a massive surge in royal revenue. But there was a severe hidden cost. This was a bureaucratic reconquest. designed explicitly to extract the maximum wealth from the colonies for the crown's benefit. Saving an empire by tightening extractive control creates an inherently hostile relationship with the governed population. The Bourbon reforms politically doomed the empire by aggressively stripping economic privileges away from the Creole elites, the American-born descendants of early Spanish colonizers. Historical baptismal records show a sharp decline in Creole parents naming their sons after the king or his viceroys. This symbolic withdrawal of loyalty signaled a growing cultural alienation before the first shots were ever fired. This cultural break soon met an economic flashpoint. The specific provinces where the intendancy system succeeded in extracting the most revenue became the primary epicenters of revolutionary activity between 1807 and 1811. Tightening its grip to maximize fiscal output, the crown inadvertently unified the local elite against it. The wealth extracted to save the empire ended up funding the movement that would dismantle it. A regime that relies strictly on forced extraction to survive will eventually finance its own rebellion. As the Spanish colonial system fractured, Britain absorbed their trade networks, becoming the world's financial capital. The difference came down to a theory of wealth. Spain believed wealth was a treasure you discover in the ground. Systemic powers understand that lasting economic strength is an institutional structure you engineer. Mountains of silver can buy global dominance for a century, but only trust and resilient institutions can sustain it.